Welcome to the fifth and final day of the WSET Diploma Student Summit 2021. Today I'm speaking with Mary Wright, who was awarded the McNie Tasting Trophy and the Freixenet Copestick Prize, both for Unit 3, D3, Light Wines of the World. A real blockbuster episode to finish the series. Mary kicks off with her origin story and transition into the wine industry, before taking us in depth on her journey from level 3 to level 4, and offering broader reflections on the diploma experience. She then offers a wealth of tips and advice on how to ace the exams, before answering 3 attendee questions, looking at solo theory learning for D3, the recommended order for theory and tasting in units D4 and D5, and overcoming exam jitters. She then takes us into exactly what she was awarded for her double award-winning performance, and finishes with some words of motivation for you diploma students. Enjoy!
So I studied languages at uni, French, Spanish and Italian. And as part of those studies, I did a year abroad in Italy. And it was on that trip when I had my revelation wine moment. Everyone talks about the wine that they tasted and were like, oh, the world of wine is something quite interesting. And I was working near Parma, teaching English in an Italian school. And I got given a glass of Lambrusco by one of the school teachers. Not in school, I must clarify. It was after school at their house as part of a dinner. And I remember thinking, crikey, what is this? It's a sparkling red wine. I had no idea that existed as a thing. And yeah, it just piqued my interest. And I thought, this world of wine is pretty interesting. And then also on that same year abroad, I flew back to the UK and happened to be sat next to a guy who was a wine buyer on the flight, got chatting to him. And then we sort of continued the journey back into London after the flight together. And as soon as he was back in radio contact, he was on the phone using about 5 different languages. So I got thinking, could be a good way to continue using my languages after uni. So long story short, I graduated and was just really eager to get into the world of wine. So my first job was with Laithwaites as a junior wine advisor, which I always think sounds like you're not the legal age to be advising anybody on wine to drink. But yeah, it was just the sort of entry level route in. And it was essentially telesales, which was sort of the fine line between character building and soul destroying. So I did that for a brief period. Then I sort of fell into supply chain and demand planning. Did that with Pernod Ricard for a while, then Corny and Barrow, which was quite an interesting transition from more sort of volume into more fine wine. I used to do the Domaine de la Romani Conti en primeur shipment, which was quite nerve-wracking. A lot of GPS trackers and didn't sleep very well before that was about to depart. And then from Corny and Barrow, I went on to Liberty Wines, where I started in supply chain. And then did a couple of years doing that. Then I was putting together the Liberty Wines price list. So a lot of sort of data cleansing, proofreading of all of the text that goes into it. And I was also doing a bit of PA support to the MD, organising trips and things. And then last year, I started a new role with Liberty as brand ambassador for the Sograp Iberia estates. So the likes of Sandeman, Casa Ferreirinha, Quinta dos Carvalhais. So yeah, that was last year. So it's been a bit of a strange year to start a role like that. The plan was to get out to Portugal in April, which hasn't happened. But I've been doing what I can on Zoom and some consumer tastings and stuff through a face mask, but really enjoying it. It's a good new varied role. So that's essentially how I got into it. I started studying diploma in 2017, I think. So I was working at Liberty Wines. They very generously sponsored me through it. And I was working in supply chain at the time, and then moved into the role as price list manager, which was actually really useful because all of the proofreading of the producer info tied in very nicely to the sort of producer knowledge that you're expected to have at diploma level. So they really complemented each other very well.
Something that's been very interesting for me from all of the guests actually so far has just been getting you to talk a bit about the transition from level 3 to level 4. In putting up this summit, I've actually been contacted by quite a few people who are actually doing the level 3, already have the level 3. And I think they're wanting to kind of, get a sense of that transition. And I'm just curious, what was that like for you when that came about?
It's definitely quite a step up. I think that the biggest step up for me was the sort of scientific and viticultural knowledge that you're expected to have pinned down in that first unit. I don't know what it's called now. I think it was called Unit 2 when I first did it, the viticulture and winemaking. I stopped studying science at GCSE. So some of the chemistry I really struggled with. And I can remember sort of covering my house in Post-it notes with the fermentation formulas and just trying to get my head around it. And that was one of the units when I read some of the additional material that they suggest. And I found that a really helpful book was Understanding Wine Technology by David Bird. Because I don't know how he does it, but he has a way of explaining that very scientific, pretty dry, let's be honest, subject matter in quite a compelling way. Parts of it are actually even quite funny of the book. So I'd really recommend reading that for anyone who's not a scientist or a horticulturalist who's a bit baffled. That really helped bring that side of the studying to life. And there are pictures and things which really helped me. I'm quite a visual learner, so that was really useful. So that was a huge step up. And then also the producer knowledge that you're expected to have. Someone said to me once that diploma is like level 3 with added producer knowledge. It's quite tricky getting to grips with all of the key producers in each region. But something that I found useful was every time you read about a new producer, follow them on Instagram. And then even when you're sort of in your downtime, you can be like swiping through and it just sort of like, revises who's who in which regions. And you might spot something that they're doing in the vineyard that you can later reference in an essay question, things like that. So I found that just trying to sort of dive more into the world of wine in every way possible helps with that sort of thing. And I think it's quite a steady learning process as well. I find it's quite similar to a language in that you can't cram it in the final 2 weeks before the exam. So little and often, and just constantly trying to read up on things. Even if you're just having a relaxing glass of wine in the evening, just take 10 minutes to write a quick tasting note and maybe just Google something about the producer so that you're sort of using every moment wisely.
Something that I've found really enjoyable has been asking all of the guests to really reflect back on those 2 years, basically, that they were diploma students, and really just to say, what do you kind of think about and what comes to mind when you look back on that experience as a whole, and I guess all the things that you've learned and all the challenges that you've overcome?
Ooh, good question. I think when I look back on it, I mourn the loss of my free time, because those 2 years didn't have very much free time at all, because most of your weekends you're either studying or feeling guilty about not studying, and trying to cram as much learning into your head as possible. So it's definitely a big undertaking, but I think it's also fun. I think that you also have to remember that it's not like it's, I don't know, an accountancy qualification, or it's a juicy subject matter. And I think that, just keep the fun in it as well. So keep balancing it with the tasting, and also met some lovely people. My class, there were some really lovely other students in it, and we did quite a few tasting sessions and things together. We also shared a bit of the revision. We divvied up some of the hefty wine regions and each wrote some really detailed notes on them and then shared them. So that was good fun. And I'm still in touch with some of them now. So definitely made some good friends along the way. And it was definitely worth it. I found that starting my new role recently, I've constantly been referring back to my fortified tasting notes and re-revising the regions in Portugal and stuff. So it's worth the slog. It does pay off, and yeah, I think that the knowledge that you gain along the way is definitely relevant to what you'll go on to do.
So I put together the guest list for the summit based on people who'd been awarded prizes for their performances during the diploma, and I'm very happy to say that you were a double award-winning diploma student.
Thank you.
And I'm just curious then, was that a surprise that you did so well? And looking back now, what do you think you did so well to get the best marks? And if possible, share some of the specifics around exam techniques, which would be, I'm sure, music to the ears of the listeners.
Okay. So I got the McNie tasting trophy for my Unit 3 tasting exam, which was a really big surprise because, being honest, I had some absolutely atrocious practice tastings where I got really obvious wines wrong. So I think that there is definitely an element of luck and it being a good day, and wines coming up that you're familiar with. But I'd also done quite a lot of practice tastings. We organised quite a lot of sessions at Liberty Wines with other colleagues who've done the diploma. Also, David Gleave, who's a Master of Wine, did quite a lot of masterclasses looking at sort of individual components of wine. So we did one on tannins, which was really useful to sort of really pin down what differentiates Pinot Noir from Nebbiolo. We did one on oak, sweetness and acidity. So I found that was really useful rather than just looking at regions or grape varieties, to actually compare components like that. That was really helpful. And another one of my colleagues did a really useful session on the quality assessment aspect of the tasting paper, because it's worth at least 5 marks, I think, in a normal tasting paper, but there's also always one paper where it's worth about 13 marks. They expect a really detailed quality assessment. So I did quite a lot of work looking at sort of stock phrases that I could tie into my tasting notes, and just practicing writing really, really detailed quality assessments. Because I find it's like in a GCSE language exam, if you say I like football, the teacher's always like, justify why you like it. Don't just say it because it's good for your health or because I support this team. I think it's the same with the quality assessment. You can't just say the wine is balanced. You have to justify why it's balanced. So, for example, the ripe fruit flavours are balanced by a vibrant acidity, or there's a well-integrated oaky note, which doesn't overwhelm the primary fruit. It just complements it, frames it nicely. There's relatively high alcohol, but it's kept in balance by a great concentration of fruit flavour. So I think tying in those justifications, so with balance, also in intensity and concentration, don't just say the wine is intense or concentrated, say why. So really spell out it's got pronounced and well-defined fruit flavours of X, Y, and Z, which contribute to the long finish. I think, you're really expected to articulate quite long sentences to justify that you've understood the quality of the wine, and that you can articulate it well. Similarly, potential for aging. You can't just say this wine has potential to age. You have to justify it's because it's got the tannic and acidic backbone and the depth of flavour to continue aging gracefully, and that you expect it to age nicely for another decade or so. You can hypothesize on what will happen. And also the other way around, if it's not a particularly age-worthy wine, say what's going to happen, that the little fruit flavours that there are going to fade away quickly and the acidity will be left out of balance. I did a lot on that. Similarly, you can comment on good varietal definition and typicity of style. So if you think that it's a Sauvignon Blanc, say the wine's an exceptionally precise example of a Sauvignon Blanc with lots of intense aromatic flavours of X, Y, and Z, high acidity, that sort of thing. Or similarly, if it's a sort of generic simple wine, and if it is, always comment that it's simple, saying it's very simple and expresses little, if any, varietal character. So I did quite a lot on really justifying the quality assessment. Also, I'd say that in the tasting, there's some easy fixes that you can do to take some of the stress out on the day. So you'll be tasting 12 wines, 4 flights of 3. Just bring along 12 clean glasses on the day, just big bag for life, even if you're on the tube. It's worth doing because you don't want to reuse the same 6. And then if you find a wine that's similar to a wine you had in the first 2 flights, be thinking, oh gosh, did I not clean the glass properly in between? And also you don't want to be faffing around with the tea towel in between the 2 tastings because it's really quite a short break that you have in between. Another thing I did was got one of those chalk pens, that you get to write on blackboards in pubs and things. I used one of those to write down the wine number because, even if you are quite organised and put things back in their rightful places, you don't know what might happen on the day. You might knock one over and then it gets very confusing. So just take that stress out and label your samples so that there's no added drama of worrying that you've mixed 2 of them up. And also invest in a decent spittoon rather than like a coffee cup or something that might be prone to toppling over your exam paper. And you don't want that. You can get them for like 15 quid on Amazon Prime. Next day there's still time. So I'd say do that and bring a tea towel. As a comfort blanket, if nothing else. And then the other thing that I did on the morning of the tasting exam, because it was in the morning, my one, someone had advised me to swill out my mouth with wine so that the first thing going into my mouth wasn't a wine after having toothpaste residue or anything. And that was a really good idea. Although I do remember being in the toilets of the Euston Hotel where it was taking place, sort of swilling out. And I did think I have to take a good long look at myself. So that's what I'd say on the tasting. And also, I remember listening to, I think it was a Guildson podcast in the run-up where they were talking about tasting techniques, and they were talking about having confidence in yourself. And it's quite American. They were like, big yourself up. Remember a time you won at a baseball game or something like that. It's not very British, but just don't doubt yourself because, to be honest, you don't really have time on the day either. You've got 10 minutes per wine to write your tasting note. So you don't want to be getting into a sort of, battle with yourself on whether it's medium plus or pronounced intensity. Just go with your instincts and get the note written quickly so you can then dedicate the time to the quality analysis. And I think it's worth remembering as well that the samples that you'll be tasting in the exam have been selected by experts as absolute benchmark examples of whatever style they are. So they're really not trying to catch you out. And I did quite a few tastings where my partner would go to the off license and pick 3 wines that were all a common grape or something. And it was really hit miss. Like I had some really atrocious tastings on that, maybe because I was being rubbish on the day, but also they're not really vetted examples either. So if you've had some bad blind tastings, don't beat yourself up about it and don't dwell on that as you go into the exam. In theory, this should be easier than any of them because it's been properly curated by the experts at the WSET. I think I had a pinotage that came up in my tasting exam, and I remember smelling it and it was so tarry, and I thought either this is faulty, which it wouldn't be, they're not going to serve a faulty wine, or it has to be pinotage. So also go on your instincts. And then final advice on the tasting, follow their SAT. I know that there's mixed views on whether it's a good way of tasting wine, but regardless of that, that's the way that the examiners are going to be marking it. So I would always write down SATAB, FFF to make sure that I covered all of the things that they expect you to on the palate. And even in the tasting notes, I used words that were in their lexicon as well. Goji berries aren't in the lexicon. It's a bit of a niche thing. The examiner might have never eaten one. So just sort of don't go too wild. Just stick to the basics, because the majority of the marks are in the tasting notes. So whether or not you come to the right conclusion on the wine, you could still get a distinction just from having addressed all of the things that they're expecting you to and having justified the quality well.
I've got to say that's absolutely brilliant advice from where I'm standing and where I'm listening. And yeah, if you're listening now, well worth playing that again because there's just so much in there. And I think one of the things that I drew out, which I'm very happy that you came back to at the end there, is that so much around giving that fuller answer around explaining balance, around explaining ageability. It's irrespective of identifying the grape type, isn't it? It's irrespective of identifying the wine. And these are things that you can do if you're practiced, if that's your sort of go-to mode in the exam, you can do irrespective of whether or not you recognize what the grape variety is.
Yeah, exactly. And there was definitely wines which I didn't get right at all. I remember thinking that a Grüne Veltliner was a Pinot Grigio, and I wrote a very Pinot Grigio-esque note, really. But I still did all right in the end. Also, though, don't jump to conclusions too early. Like when you're smelling the nose, if you think that it's a Sauvignon Blanc, don't just shoehorn the rest of the tasting note into it being that. Like, be honest the whole way through. And the same goes for the whole flight. Like, if you think that you're in Argentina, just hold on a second and look at wines 2 and 3 completely separately, and then just try and work out whether they fit into that or not. And I think, like, go to your textbook knowledge as well and use your theory. So one of the flights that came up in my exam was, it was Argentina. So there was a Torrontés, a Malbec, very oaky, and a Cabernet, which also packed a punch as well. And I think that some people thought that it was Gewürztraminer and sort of shoehorned the whole flight into Alsace. But then if you look at the reds, I don't think it would really be possible to achieve that sort of full-bodied, hefty style there. So think about the theory and whether the wine styles could all coexist in one region.
What I'd like to do now, if it's okay, is just ask you a couple of questions that have been submitted to me. Okay. People who wanted to know specific things about you and how you prepared for the exams. So the first question is around the theory component of D3 and specifically self-learning at home. And it's from a student who is struggling with deciding how to learn for the exam and is feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of knowledge and the prospect of having to remember all of this with all the other stresses that may well be going on the day. So I'm just wondering, what advice might you offer to them?
So I can understand why they're feeling overwhelmed, because it's colossal, and it's the whole of the world really that you're expected to have a bit of knowledge about. So I think I used the OCW a lot. Because I think it was before they changed the syllabus and there weren't as detailed notes provided by the diploma. I understand that there are now. And I think everything that you need to know is in the diploma notes now.
Absolutely.
So that's reassuring. Yeah. So I'd stick to those as much as possible because they've been written by the people who'll be marking them. So get those pinned down first. Also, go back to level 3. It was about 2 years between me doing level 3 and diploma. So I found that before I tackled a wine region, I'd just reread the level 3 section just to get back to the basics and then sort of add to that skeleton and go into a bit more detail via the other things. But there are plenty of things that you can do that aren't just reading very dry books. Like podcasts are a great way of just keeping learning. And you can do that when you're on your commute, in the bath, whatever. Like, you can constantly be just listening to little things, even things like watching the wine show. That's great. And like, that's brilliant because you can see the places, because so much of it is just the pages of a book and there's not necessarily huge amounts of pictures. But yeah, if you can look at the Douro Valley and then you can write about the steep terraced vineyards and stuff. Like, it's all knowledge that will be going in by osmosis. So yeah, don't beat yourself up about only reading really like sort of hardcore OCW stuff, because there are other books as well, things like Oz Clarke's Grapes and Wines. I found that was really useful because it looks at it from a grape perspective rather than a wine region. So if you've just finished doing Rioja, read the Tempranillo section of that, and then it looks at the differences between Tempranillo in Rioja and Ribera del Duero, and Oz Clarke writes in a really interesting, jolly way. So that's always quite a nice relief after some of the drier study notes. And try and sort of condense it down and only look at the really essential stuff. I think I started preparing for Unit 3, writing down all of the total hectareages of each of the wine regions. And then I got to a stage where I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm never going to revise all of these in time for the exam. Or even if there wasn't a deadline, no one's ever going to remember all of the hectareages of each of the wine regions. So try and look at the things which make each wine region unique. So it might be the Galestro soils of Tuscany or the schist of the Douro. Like, yeah, don't look at things that are common to every wine region. And also look at the viticulture and winemaking stuff that you did right at the beginning, because you're expected to tie that into your answers as well. And there's loads of elements from that can be used across all of your answers. So if you're in a wine region that's at altitude, whether it's Salta in Argentina or the Dow, you can write about the Great Diurnal Range, the cool nights which counteract the warm days and slow down the grape ripening. You can have a few like little stock phrases like that, that you can tie in across several wine regions. And similarly with winemaking, you can talk about how certain winemakers prefer temperature controlled stainless steel to preserve freshness and aromatics, whereas others make a more savoury style oak fermenting. Like, you can sort of tie in more generic stuff into your answers just to beef them up. And that sort of thing, you don't have to revise with each region. You can just tie it in wherever it fits. And then similarly with producer examples, you're expected to name drop a few in your answers, but only really focus on ones that you're already familiar with. So if you work for a wine company, get their wine list and look at those, because they're producers that you're already working with and have an idea about. I remember jotting down names of producers that I'd never heard of, and of course I never remembered them because they're just so out of context. So yeah, just sort of work with what you've got, or the Instagram thing if it's someone really key. But I mean like super key that it justifies their own entry in the OCW, like Robert Mondavi or Symington Family Estates for Port, that sort of thing. Yeah, don't sort of follow a load of random Bulgarian producers on Instagram. Nothing against them, but the likelihood of Bulgaria coming up as a theory question is small. And if it did come up, I think it would be an optional one as well. I think there's something that I'd do differently if I went back now, is to not waste time on too many of the small regions in the theory. I wrote revision notes on Switzerland and stuff, and that ended up coming up in my theory exam, but I saw the question and thought, I don't know enough about this to tackle it. So yeah, I think you can opt out of some of the more random ones, but I do know that it's quite tempting sometimes if you've just got, or if you're a bit shattered and you're about to tackle your revision at a weekend, it's quite tempting to be like, oh yeah, I might do Algeria today, or yeah, that sort of thing. Whereas I'd say do those on a weekday when you're a bit shattered after work, and use your energy when you're fresh to do the big ones like Bordeaux, Burgundy, Tuscany, California. Try and schedule your revision planning around that, so that when you've got a good stint at it, do the big ones, and make sure that you've got them all down by about a week before. Don't leave all the big ones too late.
Thank you so much, because it's such a
well-developed answer. You're demonstrating to us what you did in your exam here. You're giving us really well-developed answers, and sort of going that extra mile. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, no problem.
One question, which it might be interesting for you to think about and look back on, especially given your role now as well, I think. But one question from an attendee is for D4, which is the sparkling wine exam, and D5, which is the fortified exam. Would you recommend attempting the tasting or the theory part first, and why?
Oh, I think I did the tasting first. Just to get it done. So I allocated 10 minutes per wine and then 10 minutes per answer, because then you can taste them all to start with, write your theory answers, and maybe just go back and have a little sniff at the end, like have a bit of a break between them. Can be good to go back and revisit and just try them all again at the end after you've written your theory answers.
The final question that I received here is the big thing that I would love to learn from your guests is how they overcame exam jitters and what they did the night before and the day of the exams.
Okay. So I think a lot of the nervousness is to do with the tasting, because you're reliant on your mouth and your nose. So it's understandable if you're a bit nervous about getting a cold or whatever. I am a bit neurotic and a bit of a hypochondriac, but I did get one of those first defense nasal sprays. I don't know whether it worked or not, but if it helps reassure you and calm your nerves, do it. Also avoid scoffing into like boiling hot foods and searingly hot chilies and things. Just be a bit more mindful about your palate in the run up to it, just in case. I'd also say stop blind tasting in the couple of days running up, because you don't want to get downhearted if you get it wrong. Do a tasting note, but do it with a wine that you know and like, and just focus on doing your tasting note in those 10 minutes. Get a quick writing pen as well, that'll help. And just really revise the SAT, because you want to make sure that you hit all of the things that you're expected to, because there are marks for each of them. And do I have any other advice about the days before? Also, don't tackle a brand new region in those days. Just focus on the revision notes that you've already got, and rereading those. And try and relax. Don't go wild on blind tasting flights beforehand. Don't try and tackle brand new wine regions. Just work with what you've got now. It'll be a lot. I mean, this is 2 years of learning, and it's not just all Unit 3. You've got your winemaking and viticulture exam, which you'll have all already passed to even be here. So that's a great weapon to have in your arsenal. Tie that into your answers. Just have faith.
Yeah, I've got to say a huge thank you, because those were, I think, brilliantly well-structured suggestions and very sound advice. And I really feel like people who have got either, relatively short period of time, because a lot of the listeners will be sort of a week or so out from their January exams. But also I know that there's a lot of people who are listening who are going to be going for May or potentially October exams. So I feel like you've given a really good balance there between the sort of tips that you can put into place right away, getting those glasses, getting that tea towel and just, going in there with everything that you need. But then also the stuff that's going to take a bit longer than a week, I think, to really put into place. And I'm sure a lot of people who are, as I say, looking for the May and October exams are going to really find that useful as well. To really move towards closing now, I would just like to invite you really to share a bit more about those awards that you won for the Light Wines of the World exam performance. And just to really tell us a bit more about what prizes were awarded, what that will eventually sort of look like for you, and indeed whether or not you've been able to take those prizes as of yet, given everything else that's happening around us.
Okay. So yeah, the tasting trophy I got to hold it on the evening. You don't get to keep it, which is a shame. But no, still very pleased to have got that. And yeah, presented by Maggie McNie at MW, who's a remarkable woman. She trained as an actress and a classical singer, and then fell into wine, became an MW. Yeah, so it was a great honour to be presented that by her. The other award that I got last year was the Freixenet Copestick Prize. And because of COVID and travel restrictions, I haven't been able to take that yet. But once things are back to normal, hopefully sooner rather than later, it will involve a trip to Freixenet in Penedès, Spain. Then it goes to Mioneto, Prosecco in Italy, and then to Germany to visit Henkel and Schloss Johannesburg. So I'm really looking forward to that when I'm able to take it. But the previous year, I got to go to the Douro with Graham's. I got the port prize for the fortified, and that was fantastic. Had a great trip to Porto and the Douro Valley. Got to stay at the Quinta dos Malvados, Graham's flagship quinta. It's absolutely stunning. So that was a great trip, and I managed to tie in a visit to Sandeman as well, which is just as well because I haven't actually managed to get there since starting the new role. So luckily I could, get some of the knowledge then. So no, it's the scholarships are a really fantastic initiative that the WSET do. It really helps sort of put everything into context, and yeah, it's a great treat.
Totally. Okay. And yeah, it's then just, it's kind of optional, and it's not a specific question necessarily, but it's really just anything else that you want to share, either potentially about your current position or social media handles or websites or, anything of that sort of nature, and anything that you may wish to share, then, the floor is yours.
So yeah, if you want to look me up, I'm Mary Wright. I'm SOGRAP Iberia States brand ambassador. So yeah, add me on LinkedIn. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm Mary Wright, spelled MERI, then Wright, which was how people used to spell my name when I lived in Italy. So yeah, plenty of hugely filtered shots of wine glasses. If you want to look at those. But yeah, nothing much else to add really. Thanks for putting up with me blathering on, and really good luck. I hope that your exams go well. I'm sure that they will. You'll have put so much effort into them already. So remind yourselves of that, have faith, and go smash it.
A huge thank you once again, Mary, for sharing all of your knowledge with the listeners. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to all 5 participants at this time. Again, as I've alluded to in that episode, I feel like there's a lot of overlap between the advice that you gave, and that the different examples and different voices give listeners the best chance of taking this advice on board. I, for one, have really enjoyed discussing with all of you the approaches that you've taken to the diploma. And if you know someone who would find this episode useful, please share the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/442. And if you found this episode useful, or indeed any of the episodes from the series, please do myself and the guests a huge favour and leave their episode a review on iTunes, which you can find either using interpretingwine.com/442 or interpretingwine.com/iTunes. It's only left for me to say best of luck to you in your upcoming exams, and do please let me know how you go. You can find me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, or email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.